Okay, I guess it's time to get started. Okay. Hello all. Greetings from IEEE and ITK. I welcome you all to the Demystifying PhD, a special talk session by Dr. Subhayan Mukherjee. Before we get started, here's something for the audience. By the end of the talk, we have a small Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the live chat box. And if deemed relevant, it will be addressed by us at the end of the session. Also, if you have already submitted your questions via the Google form, you don't have to repeat it again. And it will be covered in the session itself. And if not, we'll be raising it during the Q&A time. And now, without any delay, let us get started by introducing the chief guest, Dr. Subhayan Mukherjee. He's an alumni of NITK. He's a 2014 MTech research graduate from the Department of Information Technology. After graduation, he went on to pursue his PhD in University of Alberta. Currently, he's working as a research scientist in Edmonton, Canada. So we are really glad to have you with us, Dr. Mukherjee. Thanks for accepting the invite. I hope this session helps a lot of people. So can you please go ahead and get started with the session?
Hi, I'm Subhayan, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this talk. And I really appreciate the fact that all of you submitted so many questions. A lot of the questions were really good, and I'll try to answer like most of the questions that are there in the spreadsheet, and I sort of built my PPT around it. So I hope that will be useful to you. And then please feel free to ask any questions at the end also. Okay, so let's get started with the PPT. So, yeah, here we are. So sorry, can you speak up a bit? It's like the voice is really low.
I'm sorry, that was an echo.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. Okay, so from the beginning, yeah. So I'll just start with a little about me. So I'm currently working in Tetra Tech Canada. It's an engineering consultancy firm, but the particular team that I'm in, they build a type of software for the railroad industry for doing the infrastructure inspection. So it's like they fit those special types of cameras to the inspection cars, and as the car travels along the track, the basically the cameras just keep taking a live feed of the tracks as the train travels in the real time at the track speed. So it basically like analyzes each frame and then looks for defects on the tracks and reports it to the railroad company so that like they can maintain the infrastructure, they can make the repairs and all. So before that, I was doing computer science PhD at the University of Alberta, and both in my current job and the PhD, the broad area was computer vision. So I might have used machine learning for solving some of the problems. So the problem domain was still the computer vision. And back at NITK, that was a while back. So that was like in 2014, I graduated. So I was in the IT department in the MTech research. And there also like the broad area of my thesis was also computer vision. About me, I'll just go directly over to the questions that you guys asked and try to answer most of them. But before that, I would highly recommend, and I really appreciate the effort of the IEEE NITK chapter for arranging these talks. And one of the talks that I had the opportunity to watch was the How to Approach Higher Studies in US by Robin Singh. So I briefly knew him during my time at NITK. And it's, of course, like available in this link. And the guidelines that I found that he provided are very, very well researched. And I strongly agree with most of those. So coming directly to the questions you asked, so the first question, let's say, how to prepare for PhD admission. So for the questions, I directly copied those from the Excel sheet itself. So what are the what are the importances of the different components, like how much research experience is important, how much the GRE TOEFL score or internship experience, job experience, publications is important. And I think in the previous slide that I mentioned, the Robin Singh's PPT, so he has really done a good job of quantifying how much important each of these things are. So I'll mostly agree with what he said. And one of the key points that he mentioned there, and I also like strongly agree with that, is the letters of recommendation. So how do you get strong letters of recommendation? A letter of recommendation is essentially somebody important, like your master's supervisor, your master's guide, as we call it is in India, describing what your skills are, and then like the professor that you're applying to at the foreign university he's going to look at that letter. So who is giving you the recommendation letter, that carries a lot of importance. So that's the highest priority thing. And then the ideal case, I would say, and this is a subjective opinion, it might change from person to person. Somebody else might give you a different subjective opinion. But I think if your guide collaborates with somebody in the schools that you want to get in, so reach out to your guide. Like when you start your master's project, maybe be very upfront that I want to pursue a PhD. So do you know people who are at foreign universities that you have collaborated with? So if your guide is giving you the recommendation and then the person already knows your guide due to their collaborations, that letter carries a much stronger weight than a letter that's coming from somebody that your potential professor does not know. So if the guide is already working with somebody, see if the guide is already collaborating with somebody at present, maybe not in the past. So you work jointly on such a project remotely from India. Nowadays, due to COVID, I think a lot of professors are more open to the remote internships. And this is not like my opinion, this is actually fact. I've seen this happen in Canada. So in Canada, you have this type of internships provided by an organization. It's called MyTax. And earlier, the only way that you could come for an internship through MyTax was to be physically present in Canada for the summer years. Like you would probably come in May and work for like 2-3 months in some lab, in some university in Canada with a particular professor. And then you go back to India and like you just finish your program. But now in the current, like the past year and this year, there's been a whole lot of interns who are working remotely. So now this is actually a good opportunity. So if you want to do such a remote work, but then it's entirely up to the guide that you have in your master's. So the other possibility is you once COVID is over, you intern at the collaborators lab after graduation. So there's a bit of a risk associated with that. So maybe we'll come to that later. Let me cover most of the questions first. So the basic idea is that if your potential professor, he knows you directly by working with you, like you as an intern, or working with you remotely, or your supervisor during your master's in India, then your chances are way more than if the application for the PhD is coming from somebody that the supervisor, I mean, the potential professor does not know. So, and during these kind of collaborations, you also have the opportunity to publish something jointly. And as you can see, I put it in the brackets, quality over quantity. So I think it's again my subjective opinion, but it's best to produce a few papers if you're going for publications, because I also saw one question that said that what is the importance of publications in research admissions? So I think it's better to go with less quantity but good quality. So publish in good places that might require maybe 3-4 more months of effort, more experiments, but then you get a publication that's in a higher impact factor journal, or it's like a higher quality conference. So that would like drastically increase your chances of getting a PhD admit. So the first priority is strong LORs. Second priority is, I think some of you already asked in the questions that how much importance is the job experience or the internship experience. So the first thing that I want to point out here is when you actually talk about your job experience in your research statement or the statement of purpose, that it's called the SOP, what you would ideally want to do is portray the experience of the internship or the job that you did after masters as something like an applied research. So obviously, like if you're going to a company, there are very few companies that do theoretical research like you do in masters. But even if it's an applied research, and if it's something in the broad area in which you want to pursue your PhD, because when you're applying for PhD, you don't just apply for a PhD in comp sci. You don't apply for a PhD in mechanical. You apply it at least in some broad area. So that's the bare minimum requirement of applying for a PhD. So it could be in computer vision, could be in machine learning, could be signal processing, image processing, or even like slightly more focused things like so basically like you can't apply in a very broad area like CS. So if the job experience or the internship experience is something at least in the broad area of PhD, then that would help, and that would be the priority too. So in the letter of reference, can you sell your job experience as the one in the applied research. So the last thing that probably comes as an important thing is the score in the standardized tests. So standardized tests means TOEFL or GRE. And I think, again, this is my subjective opinion, but I think most people would agree on this point is that because those tests don't really test your skills in CS, it's basically like if you look at GRE, it's mostly like 10th and 12th standard maths and like some English, like some component of English proficiency, but that doesn't really say anything about your research potential. So it's basically sort of a replacement for like a standardized GPA. So because different schools have different standards of grading, that's why this is a way to standardize across schools. So that's why I think this is a very less priority thing. And I'll just like share a personal anecdote. So when I was applying for PhDs, like in my current university, the current professor that I got admission in, he pretty much said this, that I've looked at your research statement and your other credentials, and I think that's good enough, and I agree to take you on. But you should also make sure that since there are a limited number of positions for PhD admissions, so the admission committee should not look at your GRE or TOEFL score as a red flag. So it should pass like the minimum criteria. But then it was pretty clear to me that that's definitely something as secondary. Like my primary professor is not looking at that as one of the main criteria, because he's saying that I hope they also find that good enough. So that's not his priority. So that's how I got this impression that the standardized test scores are not really that important. And there are some cases you would see that even some top schools are getting rid of them altogether. Um, and as long as it doesn't raise red flags to the admission committee, it should be okay. So coming to the next question, so what is the ideal time to start applying for foreign PhD? So the first thing that I would like to mention for this is it's a marathon, not a sprint. So why do I say this thing? Because in India, we have this mindset that no matter if it's undergrad admissions or if it's like master's admissions, for undergrad admissions, you have JEE, for masters, you have GATE. And a lot depends on how you perform during those 3 hours of JEE or during those 3 hours of GATE, because that score is almost like a determining factor to which institute you're getting into. It's not doesn't work the same way for foreign PhD admissions. So test scores, basically the GRE or TOEFL scores, those are the scores that you have, but hold like little to no importance in admission decisions, unlike GATE or JEE. So ideally, you should start planning for your PhD admit before you start your major project in masters. So most admissions are in fall, and the deadlines are in fall of previous year. So if you're like trying to get an admit in 2021, this would be the time that you would be submitting most of your applications. So it starts in September, October, and it goes up to December or at max Jan of the next year. What that basically means is that for each application, you would have to reach out to 2 or 3 referees who would submit the reference letters for you, and you should give them like enough time. So you should make sure that you reach out to them well ahead of the application deadline so that you can still meet the deadline. And then you also finish the GRE and TOEFL score like tests well before that, because when you try to book slots for these, you would see that they would start disappearing fast as and when the deadlines reach sooner, or you might not even get a free slot in your city. You might have to travel. I actually had to do that. Like you have to travel to a different city just for giving the tests. So the next question that came up is like, do I apply directly to the university portal or first mail the profs? So I think this varies from university to university, but based on my experience of applying, I think for US admissions, the way it works is initially your application goes to a committee, and the committee jointly decides whether admissible or not based on your overall credentials. But your potential prof, if he backs you, it still helps, but you still have to go through that committee, and that committee has a greater amount of say in the admissions initially. And the way, as far as I know how it works, is like during the first year, you take some standard courses in your broad area of PhD, and you work with different profs, approach the individual profs, and say that from the second year, I want to work with you till the end of my PhD. So that's why in the US admission committee that has a lot of say, but the prof backing you still helps because the committee at least knows that there is one or more profs who are going to take you on. In contrast, what I've seen in Canada is that like most universities, I didn't apply a lot in Canada, but in UFA, it's at least in the computing science department where I got my PhD. So it's clearly mentioned that you should directly approach the profs first. So if and only if a prof is you on, then only you can apply for the PhD, otherwise not. It's clearly mentioned. So the way PhD admissions work in UFA, at least like in University of Alberta, or probably in other universities as well in Canada, is you have to approach the prof first. So the next obvious question that comes is that when you're sending an email to the prof, what you're getting your message across. So the first point, like I said, keep it short, but show genuine interest in his or her current research. So what do I mean genuine interest? Don't use template emails. They can find that out in like 2 minutes that you are just making a template email and sending it to the prof. Doesn't work, never works. Best thing to do is go through their website. Each prof has a website that is reasonably well maintained. So there you would put the current projects they're working on, few of their recent papers, and then better still try to contact some of their current grad students. The reason for this is sometimes those web pages are not updated. One, the other thing is the current grad students might be able to tell you which are the projects that the prof is currently working on that have the longest duration of funding. So maybe there is a project that the prof is currently working on that have the longest duration of funding. So maybe there is a project that has just started and the funding is for like 5 years. So the prof knows for sure that he can easily take on as compared to a project that is just about to end. The funding for that is just about to end. So those kind of details are usually, of course, like some idea of whether your potential prof has enough funding in the type of topics that you're going to get the PhD in. So the other thing is, of course, those projects should fit your skills. So it's not enough just like blindly like apply to any projects under a prof. It should fit your skills because you have to stay with that for like 4 or 5 years. So so the basic takeaway from this last point, that what to write, is that like do some research, like read some of his or her papers, so that when you are sending an email, it's more like showing the prof what I have done and what you are doing and how my skills are applicable to what you're doing, and this is what I bring to your lab. So this sort of a tone should be there. So the next question is a related question. So should your MTech thesis topic and that for your PhD, should it be the same or can it be different? So again, there are two scenarios. One is the ideal scenario where it should be a continuation of your master's work. But in reality, I mean, this can be really difficult because, of course, PhD admissions are like highly competitive depending on the quality of schools that you're applying to. So you may not find a topic that's exactly a continuation of your master's. So practically all you need to do, like I said, is show the topic of relevant skills. If you have interest and a background proves that you have the relevant skills, and your background proves that you have the relevant skills of having success in your PhD in that topic. So the next question is it good to do a job for some years after MTech and then pursue PhD, or do we do it right after MTech? So again, I think I shortly like touched upon this in one of the previous questions, is that if you're doing a job, make sure it is in a related area of your PhD, then only that job experience would add some value to your statement of purpose. And you have to sell it. When I say sell it, what that means basically is like you should give some like some sort of description that would say that, okay, what was the applied research component in the job? So maybe you improved the performance of some APIs by so and so percent. Maybe you improved the accuracy of some object detection module or something in the company by so and so percent. So those sort of things, if you got a publication out of that, that's excellent because that's in the public domain. Anybody can check that out. So in that case, the job experience would be something really strong. But at least try to portray that your experience was not just software engineering. So it had some applied research component. So the next question is, I think that if I want to pursue my PhD in some really good foreign universities, what is the amount of money I need to shell out, basically? Like, and of course, like the related question, are there scholarships for PhD? Sorry, for postgrad. So PhD admissions, at least based on what I know, uh, and I'm not talking about the masters that are continuing to PhDs. Usually, PhD admissions are funded. So when I say funded, what do I mean? The funding covers your tuition, and it also covers the cost of living, staying, eating, whatever. And you can also make some savings from that. So I think I should point something out. So when I say PhD funding covers tuition, so the way it works is slightly different for the US and Canada. So in US, if you have a PhD admit and you have a like teaching or a research assistantship, so that's called the TA and the RA. If you have those, your tuition fees are automatically paid by the university. You don't have to pay them. So as long as you have a TA and RA, your tuition is taken care of by the university. In Canada, the way it happens, at least for UFA, and I know that's the case for other universities as well, is you pay everything, but it's just that the TA and RA are enough that it will cover your tuition and the living costs. So, I mean, it's basically the same, just the way it's distributed is different. But the summary of this whole thing is like, if you're getting a PhD admit, and particularly a PhD, not a master's continuing to a PhD, in most of the cases, your funding will be taken care of. And it's also actually true for if you're a very strong master's applicant, and it's mostly for masters who express the intention that I want to continue into a PhD. So who would be a very strong master's applicant? Somebody who has had a master's already and he has like some good track record of research in that master's that's of interest to your second master's that you're applying abroad. So if you're a very strong master's applicant, also you get this sort of a funding arrangement where all the things are taken care of. So the next question, like, are international PhDs accepted in Indian industry? So the idea is that if I go abroad for a PhD, then come back, am I going to be employable? And this is specific to PhDs from German universities, but unfortunately, I don't know enough to comment on German PhDs specifically. What I know is that there are people who regularly get their PhDs in the US, at least in these streams like ECE, ECS, so electrical and computer engineering, electronics and computer engineering, CS, and they come and join back companies like Samsung R&D. And of course, this is something I heard from somebody, my very close friend who was in Samsung R&D back in 2015 when I was starting my PhD. So that happens. So that's not a problem. And I also have friends, at least two of them that I can think of right now, who got their thesis-based masters at U of SES, so in our department, and they got similar offers. And they are currently in India. No, I think one of them is in India. He took the offer and went away. The other one, he's still here. He's working for some Canadian companies. So yeah, I mean, in short, so you should not have a problem of PhDs from abroad being recognized in industries back in India. So the next question is, what are the requirements to get a fully funded PhD abroad? Please talk about scholarship opportunities. Like I said, PhD admissions are fully funded usually, and it's extremely risky actually to accept any offer that does not guarantee funds throughout the program. And the normal duration of a PhD, if you have a master's, it should be 4 to 5 years. That's what I've seen. And the reason that I'm saying that it's risky to accept an offer is because if there is no guarantee of funds, then you don't you back out in the middle, you might just lose a few years. And there are some universities that give out offers without like PhD offers without making the funding clear. I mean, I've seen somebody who was my very close friend at an IDK getting such an offer, but he didn't accept it, and for good reason. So neither should you. You should always make sure that if you're getting a PhD offer, it's fully funded, because that's usually how it is. So most common types of funding, like I said, so you would have a teaching assistantship during fall and winter, and you would have an RA during summer. So I put an asterisk there for a reason. So before that, let's come back to what's a TA. TA is you're teaching, you're helping one of the professors teach one of the undergrad courses in that particular department. So when I say helping the prof teach, I mean that you're probably helping out with the labs, you're designing the lab assignments, or you're evaluating the lab assignments, and you're helping the undergrad students learn those concepts, implement those things in the lab. You're maybe you're correcting the quizzes, maybe you're helping him correct the midterm or the end term question papers, these sort of things. So it won't be something very heavy. Occasionally, you might have to give like a few presentations in class, but I don't think, especially like during the initial years of your PhD, no professor would ask a TA to explain something extremely difficult. So that usually doesn't happen. That's reserved for postdocs, not for TAs. And then I said that during the summer term, you would have an RA. So RA is when the prof, your potential prof, like your PhD prof, is paying you to do your own research. So I'll probably pause here a bit. Yeah. So when I said like I have an asterisk on the RA, what do I mean? So it works slightly different here than in the US. In the US, what I've heard from people is usually for the summer terms, you are expected to get an internship ideally. So you would intern with some company during the summer. So during that time, you're not registered, and either you're not registered or you're not paying tuition. So you're basically getting paid by the company. This is what people usually do. But in Canada, the way it works is you get a TA during fall and winter, and you get an RA during the summer. So this is the most common type of funding, and pretty much all PhD admits come with that, like at least what I've seen from my experience. So a harder type of funding to get, but a better type of funding if you get something called a fellowship throughout the program. So a fellowship is something, it's like the university is giving you money. That's it. So it's giving you money without expecting any kind of work from you. Of course, not expecting you to just stay and watch Netflix at home. So it's just expecting that you should do your research. That's it. So you don't have to teach any courses or anything. So there's no time wasted in that. And the hardest type of funding to get, but arguably the best type, is the external funding. So there, the department or the university is not giving you funds. There are some agencies, like some government agencies or some organizations that give out certain like special types of funding. And I think they are called by different names. Some people call them scholarships and whatnot. So the basic idea is that the amount of funding in that case is significantly higher than a TA or an RA. And it's also the most prestigious if you are getting an external funding, but that's pretty hard, of course. Like at least like getting an external funding when you're getting a PhD admit itself, that's pretty hard as an international student. Maybe you can apply for that thing during your second year or third year, and then you get that. I've seen people getting that, even international students. But getting that when you're entering the program is hard. So the rule of thumb, and again, like this is opinion of mine, it may or may not be true. So if you have a fellowship or an external funding, then some of the top schools or the profs that you would otherwise consider that I would never get into this prof's lab because he's like way out of my league. He has, I don't know, his research profile is out of the world or something. So even they might consider your application. The reason for that is very simple. So the prof doesn't have to spend money on you, you're taking care of that. And as long as you meet some basic requirement that the prof has, so you're sort of bringing the money with you, so they're more open to take you. But again, this is, I'm being a bit direct, and this is a bit of like an opinion on my side. So moving on, so what are the types of opportunities available in academia and industry in abroad after PhD? So for academia, I think for PhDs, so when I say that you want to go in academia, means your long-term goal is to get an assistant professor position in some university abroad. So usually for most of the foreign universities, as far as I know, for most of the IITs and IIITs as well, it's probably better you get a few postdocs. It's definitely true for foreign universities, and I think it's true for like most of the IITs and IIITs as well. So you get a PhD, and then you get a few postdocs, and then you land an assistant prof position. So what's the benefit of that? Like you get the greatest amount of freedom in research, so you can pretty much like set your own research agenda and stuff, as long as it like aligns with the broad research agenda of the department. But you're sort of your boss. The downside is, of course, the compensation is not as good as industry, but then this is mostly true, I think, for postdocs. Postdocs is not usually paid the same amount as an industry in general. But in many of the assistant prof positions, even the entry level salaries abroad are almost at par with like the entry level positions at industry. Now, maybe 10, 15, or 20 years down the line, it might diverge, but the like starting salaries for profs in foreign universities are pretty good. So the other option is you could have a postdoc in industry, but based on my experience, it's only the big labs that let you do a postdoc there. So when I say big labs, it's obvious: Microsoft, Google. I mean, these kind of companies, this level of companies. So that would usually be like a 1 year postdoc. So there would be like rolling applications. You sort of make a profile on their website, on their careers webpage, and then they just select applications from there. So the next opportunity is you could have these several industry jobs that have a sizable portion of applied research. So you won't do theoretical research there, but it would have like a good amount of applied research that you could do. And you would find, I think, at least based on my experience of applying in the US and Canada, even during the like pandemic, as you can see that I graduated last year in April. That's when my defense was, and that's like the worst time to graduate. But still, I saw that there are, at least in CS, there are sizable number of such jobs. So there would be some industry jobs that are more research intensive. So they would be more into like papers and patents. And there would be few industry jobs that are highly research intensive. So there you would be doing stuff that's almost comparable to if you were a faculty at some good university. And again, these are usually the big labs. So what's the downside? The downside is that, and I've seen this, like I have a, like I know somebody who faced this. So you could be laid off really quickly if your work fails to meet expectations. What do I mean by that? So, of course, this person was highly qualified. Like he was a PhD from Stanford, and he did 3 years of postdoc in Stanford. Then he joined a lab in a big lab, and then there were basically two teams that were set to solve one particular research problem. One of the teams solved it first. This person was in the other team. They were laid off in 1 week's notice. He was given a severance package. He was already a green card holder in the US, so he didn't really face that much of a problem. But I'm saying that this happens. This is not to discourage anybody. It's just the reality. So the basic takeaway from this is, if you really want to do research and very high quality research and still have a secure job, it's best to go in the direction of academia, get a few postdocs, and then be an assistant prof, rather than be in industry, because in industry such jobs are very limited, one, and the other thing is you run this risk. Okay, so what's the next question? Is MTech sufficient to get into R&D jobs? And this is one of the questions that I'm not so sure about. So yeah, so this is the details of the question that I got from the Excel sheet. So certain positions have this requirement that you specifically need a PhD, but then are there other positions like that? So the honest answer is no, I don't know for sure. Maybe yes, based on how much of experience you have, like the applied research experience in industry, that would make up for not having a PhD, or that would even make you better than a PhD. So what I observed when I was in my internship in Dolby Division in the US and currently at Tetra Tech Canada is that the vast majority of employees have PhDs, and the vast majority of the interns in the research teams are also pursuing their PhDs. The thesis-based master students or the course-based master students were mostly in the development and testing teams in Dolby. And same applied for the full-time employees who were in the development and testing teams. They had masters. So I would say that probably, like, at least based on the job postings that I've seen in the US and Canada, having a PhD helps, but it's not a deal breaker if you have a master's and a sufficient number of years of experience. Usually the rule of thumb that I've seen a few companies they post is you're either a master's with 5 years of experience in industry or you're a PhD. But these are the job postings, and that may vary a lot. I mean, that may vary across different like sectors, what type of company you're applying. So it's complicated. So that's why I said that honest answer is I don't know for sure, but I'm just sharing you my experience. So long question. So sole purpose of getting a PhD, if it's for teaching, then should I continue with my current guide and then make it a PhD from an MTech, or should I do from the IITs? Again, this is difficult or maybe even unfair to generalize. So I'll just say what I know for a fact. So among the people that I know personally, who are teaching at the old IITs or the new IITs or the triple IITs or like central universities like JNU. So of those people, everybody got their PhDs from the old IITs or ISC, but this doesn't mean that you couldn't have a PhD from an NIT and get into similar positions. So next question is about the process of admission. I mean, we briefly covered this. So is GRE optional, or is would it add some strength to my application if I submit it? So it could vary by program, like you would have to see for individual programs. But back when I was applying, it was required. But after I got into my PhD, I did hear some talks that maybe GRE, they could get rid of that requirement altogether. When I was applying, I saw some, like I'll say one specific example. It's the MIT Media Labs. So they didn't have any requirement. I think either the GRE or the TOEFL was not required. If I remember correctly, it was the GRE that was not required. So it varies a lot by program. It's hard to generalize. And again, like what is the average score that you need? You need to check. Some departments, they post their admission averages each year. So you would go to the website, there'll be some Excel sheet that will tell you that this is the admission, like average year score that got the admission. And it's hard to actually, like, this comes to the fact that, okay, so why is the GRE then needed at all if it's not so important? So it's usually because the CS programs, and again, this is an actual statistic from the University of Alberta, like our own department. So they got like almost 3,000 grad applications this fall. So nobody can go through all those applications. There has to be some criteria using which they like screen out some applications. So what you basically have to make sure that you pass that initial filter. That's pretty much only the reason for having the GRE scores. May not be universally true, but again, this is what I saw. So does low CGPA affect the chances of getting a PhD admit? So my admission GPA was 3.26, but then most others I knew would have had 3.6 plus. So the thing that I mean by this, like, it doesn't have a big effect on your admission decision. But then it does have some effect. Like there could be some minimum cutoff that you need to clear, and that's again for the same reason that you have these 3,000 grad applications. Nobody can go through all of those, so you have to have some criteria for filtering them. So again, I put a star on AGPA. What does AGPA mean? So usually what they see, and this becomes a bit complicated for masters than PhD, is they look at your last 20 credits. So it could mean that, let's say for MTech research, you don't take that many number of courses. Most people take 3 courses and this thing, right? The research course, the research methodologies course, but there's no GPA associated with that. So it's basically 3 courses. So that would be probably 3 into 3, so 9 credits, if I remember correctly. And then they'll look at the credits that make up the final years of your bachelor's. So they combine all of that and they calculate your CGPA, and then they convert that to the 4.0 scale, because in the US and Canada, they use a 4.0 scale. So based on that, my admission GPA was 3.26, while most others I knew had 3.6 plus. So that's actually like a 10% difference in CGPA if you look at it. But yeah, I still got in. So maybe that's not so important. So, where do I see myself financially after doing a PhD? So, you could get entry-level faculty positions in US and Canada. Although, like I said, you probably need one or two postdocs before you get that. And then, but again, the main idea is that nowadays, even in India, these positions are actually quite well paid. And over time it becomes more secure than industry. Like the same perception that we have for academia in India is also true to some extent in like abroad. So if you're thinking of industry, so not academia, then what I've usually seen, again, this is a generalization, is that if somebody is hiring a PhD, then it's one seniority level higher than a bachelor or master's. So that's what happens in my current company, and I've seen that similar trend in even in startups. So probably from an industry perspective, also you get some benefit if you get a PhD. So again, like a related question, I think who should go for PhD? So what is the future scope and career? So the main thing I think is if you have a genuine interest in research, so what that means is like you better actually do some research. So if you are in a master's program, that's actually great. If you are in an undergrad program, there is also enough opportunities for doing research in an ITK, I think. So get into some research, uh, get into some research project, maybe publish something, but I'll like expand on this in my answers to a future question. I mean, in one of the next slides, but the main idea is like you should be sure that you have a genuine interest in research because it's a 4 to 5 year commitment, so you don't want to back out in the middle. So usually it takes 4 to 5 years, and it depends mostly on the supervisor. And this is the same in India as well as abroad. So you should sort of like set the expectations properly. Uh, at the beginning, get an idea of what your supervisor is expecting from you, like what standard of work or what level of work to graduate. And yeah, so the fees as such, like at least for abroad, I think it's the same fees for PhD and masters. So it's like the grad students are assessed one particular amount of fees, and the undergrads a different amount of fees. So uh, yeah, so it'll be the same as the masters. So if you are not sure of your particular topic, then how do you proceed? So the best way to do that is like look at the courses that you took during your master's. Like which projects did you do in the courses? So is there one particular project that you liked working on? So then maybe pursue something on that topic or something in that broad area at least. The other way to think about it is like if you look at the job postings wherever you want, like maybe in Bangalore, maybe in Silicon Valley, wherever, like what are the jobs, which particular areas are the most amount of jobs saturated in, and that also matches with your background and your interests. So accordingly work backwards, do the back calculation and choose your PhD topic accordingly. So you could also look at it this way. So this is actually one of the questions I really like. So what skills to develop during MTech that can be benefited in PhD? So the first thing that I think helped me personally is how you do a critical reading of research papers. So the first step in any, like I think like most of you, when you did your like proposal selection for the masters, you read some papers, you saw that some place has not been explored already, and maybe I can do something in that area and then get that published. So critical reading of research papers, finding those gaps. The next two things, I have these links and I'll share this with you probably with Shankar, or like I'll put it on a Google Drive. So this is a PPT from one of the professors. His name is Ramesh Raskar. And if I remember correctly, he is in MIT Media Labs, and he tells you a way of how you, if you have some ideas that you get from reading papers, how you can generate a new idea that you can work on. So that's the cornerstone of a master's, like a thesis-based master's, and definitely a PhD, that you want to generate new ideas and then work on that. It doesn't need to be a groundbreaking idea. It needs to be something that people haven't exactly explored before. So how do you go about that? So the other skill that I think, and especially like when you're coming from a BTech background, is like having this shift from trying to implement a working software, a complete working software, to just quickly reading a paper and implementing a prototype. So of course you don't implement the paper always. You would go to GitHub or some repository that has the code and then use that. But the main idea is how do you reproduce the results in that paper, and you build like the minimum amount of software needed for that. So the last thing that I think was really helpful, and this is one of the things that GRM sir shared with me. So it's Professor Pradeep Atre. He's at the CS department, University of Albany. So he has a PPT on how to write a research paper. We would like normally think that okay, it's first the title, then the authors, then the abstract. Everybody knows that, right? But the way he presents it is he says that maybe you need to write your proposed method first, and then the results, and then based on that you go to the abstract. So what is the most natural way for you as a researcher to write the paper rather than somebody reading it? So this PPT is one of the ones that I found important, I mean like useful. So I'll share this with you. Motivations to go for a PhD rather than joining a company. So it's basically the whether you're more motivated for faculty positions, that would be like of course like still a sizable amount of like PhDs they go for the faculty positions. Or do you want an applied research at a company, or do you want a software engineering job? So based on that you have to like select your own motivation. It's mostly about you. So again, how do you elevate yourself to get into a PhD position abroad? So I put an asterisk on elevate because it's not really about elevating you. So it's pretty much doing the same things that you do as an MTech or an MTech research student. It's just that like it's just some planning, and I'll like touch briefly upon that in the like following slides or maybe during the Q&A. So the basic idea is get into research, like I said earlier. It need not be groundbreaking in the first attempt, and go through all the steps. So first you read papers, find out where you can contribute, implement existing papers, think of what you can improve on the model itself, like theoretically, or prototype that and then compare with the existing results. And the last and the most important step, that where you fared better than the existing ones, or where you did not fare better and why. Like if something worked, why did it work? If something didn't work, why did that not work? So go through this whole exercise and then see that did you enjoy the experience, and how did you handle setbacks. So of course you won't get a result on the first day. There'll be cases where you try some idea, doesn't work out, so you scrap that and you start something new, or maybe you change something, and maybe this takes like a few months and you don't get any results. So how do you handle that? Do you enjoy that experience despite those setbacks? Then only you should decide for a PhD, because it's like a 4 to 5 years thing. So what are the things that you consider when selecting a country or a university for PhD? So the four main things about the country itself is climate, of course, because like it's vastly different between India and the North America. It's way colder, way drier compared to India. The culture, I mean, some cultures are, at least they are perceived to be more open to immigrants or people from other places. Again, like I'm being a bit blunt here, but that's just how it is. So the next thing is immigration. So are you planning to settle there? So if you're planning to settle there, you need to get some sort of a permanent residency there, and ultimately a citizenship. So how open is it? How easy is it to get a citizenship in that country? And of course, like if you're going to stay there, you need to work. So how good is the economy? What sort of jobs are available there? Some countries are extremely good for certain types of jobs, a lot of opportunities, but not good for CS. So probably if you're a CS student, you won't go there, even though the country as a whole is rich. So next is about the university. So the main thing to consider here is that the PhD experience is about your supervising prof than the university. So you would be working really with your supervisor 90% of the time. Of course, you would attend some seminars by other students, by in the other departments, but that's bare minimum. Most of the times you would be with your supervisor. So basically the reputation of the lab, that matters much more than the department or the university. And how do you know that what the reputation of the lab is? If you have somebody who has been there, that's good. Some senior, you can always reach out to the person. But otherwise, you can look at the type of collaborations the lab has. So just look at which other labs or with other industries the lab is collaborating with, what sort of work they're doing, what is the impact of the work. You could look at the students' profiles, the current students. most university websites have a listing of students, or the labs themselves, they have a listing of the students, and you can get their resumes from there. It's pretty easy. So what sort of projects they're working on, where are they publishing, where are they interning, and last but not the least, like how much time does it take to graduate? Because everybody has a different priorities, right? So somebody might say that, okay, I want a extremely successful PhD with like top quality publications, but that may take like 7 years. You might not have that much of time. You might want to do it sooner, like in 4 or 5 years. So that's when that setting that expectation and trying to see whether you meet them, that comes into play. So the other thing is alumni profiles. So for people who have graduated already from the lab, where are they getting placed in industry or academia? And again, I put an asterisk in placements, because the when we hear the word placements in India, we understand that you're going to finish your first few years of your degree program. So if it's BTech, like first most of the degree, like the fourth year, or if it's a master's, then you finish the first year and then you sit for placements. The companies keep coming 100, 200, whatever in CS, and then ultimately you get in. Doesn't work like that in US and Canada. There are some job fairs that you can attend that the university hosts, and companies do come to that. But then the vast majority of people, what they do is they get jobs by themselves. So it's literally like having knowing some people, maybe like you met them at a conference, or you have your LinkedIn profile and you like network professionally. So you have the common contacts. I got this current job just because I had a LinkedIn profile. Even during that time of April of 2020, that was like the worst time to graduate. So it's somebody we had some common like contacts with the recruiter, and then that's how I got the job. So that's how important networking is. Uh, yeah, so I mean, even it's in the academia also, you would see there is a lot of importance of networking, but it's more so in industry maybe. Yeah, so maybe then do you recommend doing a PhD in abroad in India? And I think I'm getting towards the end of the presentation. I put this question in the end, but maybe before I go into this question, I just want to revisit one of the earlier slides. So this was one of the questions that I had. I'm not sure if you can see it because I didn't have time to put it in the PPT. So how does publications help in securing admissions? So this was one of the few questions that came in towards the end, like in the last maybe few hours or 1 or 2 days. So one is, I think it's better to focus on quality on quantity. It should be in the broad area of the PhD, and ideally, if it's jointly with the potential prof or his or collaborator, then it might have more impact in your admission decisions. So how are publications evaluated? Of course, they're given some weightage, but again, like I think this point would be something that I want to stress on. How to publish articles? This is a really involved question. It will take a lot of time, I think. Maybe we can connect offline for this. So the other question that I saw is, how do you convert an MTech with a CGPA 8.5 to PhD? So it's mostly in foreign universities, at least based on the research outcome of your master's thesis. So maybe the publications, or uh, what is your contribution to that particular area as your supervisor sees it. And CGPA doesn't really play that big a role. I mean, there is of course a minimum requirement, but pretty much everybody meets that requirement. And I think one of the very interesting questions that I came across is, what is the mindset to overcome the possible mental insecurities while pursuing a PhD? This is really good, and I'm happy that somebody asked this. So the first thing is, make sure that you, if you can, then minimize the insecurities. So be consistent and open in your communication with the supervisor. Uh, what that means is basically like, yeah, bluntly speaking, it's not exactly like a progress report. So it should make sure that when you meet with the supervisor, even if it's once a week for 15 minutes, you discuss what I've done, what you're expecting, and make sure that you have that connect between what you're doing and what she's expecting or what he's expecting. And like I said, it's better to set the expectations earlier rather than later on during the PhD. The second thing is, I think, set aside some time for like maybe some team sports. This helps because the way the society is structured in India and abroad, at least in US and Canada, are not exactly the same. So This is one of the main things that I found that you can do to help with that, the mental, you like help with the mental health. So the other thing is like maybe just try to publish in a conference a year, so that way you are forced to travel and network. So for people who like travel, that's a good refreshment. So that helps. And then I'll get back to the last few slides that I was on. So, do you recommend a PhD in India or abroad? And is it better to settle abroad or India as a prof? And my short answer is that each has its pros and cons depending on what you want in life. And the reason that I went back to those earlier slides to read out that question is that academics and society function differently in India and abroad, like I mentioned. So, what I mean by this is that it's always like a trade-off. So it's not a clear-cut answer like whether you should do it, whether you should settle in India or abroad, because the way people talk to you, the way you interact with people, it's quite different abroad than in India. I mean, of course, there are some basic common factors because it's still people, but so overall, it's hugely different. So coming to the like a from the professional front, I think it's generally if you have a reasonably good PhD or a few postdocs, like I mentioned, from abroad, it helps you land a faculty job even at the IITs back home. So maybe this is more true for the old IITs than the new ones. But when it comes to industrial jobs after PhD, I don't know if it's changed now, but the time that I finished my master's, I think it was still like you get way more industrial jobs that are suitable for a PhD abroad than you get in India. Things might have changed now. So coming to the funding, so in India, this is of course for the professor and both the student. So the funding, because it comes basically from the Ministry of HRD, so it's not like regulated by like it's not regulated by somebody in the middle. So it's sort of more secure in that sense. Whereas, like I said, I'll mention it in the next slides. Like if you're a prof, you're sort of more in. You sort of have to get more funding by yourself. You can't just rely on the government for that if you're a prof abroad. So, but overall, I think based on what I've heard from different people, again, this is highly subjective and people might have different opinions on this. The overall experience as a student seems to be a bit better compared to India. I haven't been a prof, so I can't say how it is to be a prof. So coming to the fact if you're a prof and want to settle abroad or not. So profs abroad, in my view, or at least from what I've heard, they seem to have a bit more freedom in their functions. So what does that mean? So if you're a prof abroad, like I said, it's like it's sort of you're building your own startup company. So the university gives you some funds, but then you are also expected to get external funding. So that's funding that's coming in from not the university or the department. It's coming in from those other organizations, maybe even from companies. So the more of such funding you get in, the more the department's reputation increases, the more you progress in your career. It's as simple as that. And of course, if you get such type of funding, you would be extracting the best students also. So your career progression depends how much external funding you acquire. So, and the other thing is like if you're an early career prof, so if you're like in the first few years or first, let's say 5 to 10 years, when you don't have the tenure, when you don't have like sort of the permanent position, during that time, like till getting that permanent professorship, you have to do a substantial amount of research by yourself, not based on your students. Like you have to do research, you have to get your own hands dirty. So I think nowadays it's pretty much become the same in India as well. So yeah, it's probably the similar thing that you find. So this is one thing, like the next point that I mentioned, that the freedom to recruit talented students and postdocs. So this is about the bureaucracy, like. So there are less bureaucratic hurdles on acquiring and spending funds for research. So this is probably still somewhere that you have an advantage if you're a prof abroad than in India. It seems like there is less bureaucracy in that. So, but the downside is, of course, that since you're on your own, sort of, or you're sort of your own boss more in abroad than in India, so it's also quite stressful. So, and I've heard like it's sometimes it's even more stressful than the industry jobs. But then after that, once you get the tenure, maybe it becomes more secure. So yeah, this is again like a broad statement. A good thing is that the Indian society still has more warmth. And abroad, you get like more individual freedom, privacy, dignity of labor. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've heard of all of these things. So the downside of the society abroad that I've seen is more people tend to go off the rails compared to the amount of population. So off the rails means they don't achieve their full potential. They get into some drugs, whatnot. So those sort of things. So if you, yeah, again, this is maybe slightly subjective, but that's what I've seen. So uh, yeah, like I mentioned, like the style of communication is vastly different. So what do I mean by this? I'll maybe explain this a bit more. It's not just about the accent. So it's the way people communicate, and this comes into play even in the professional scenario. Let's say if you're a new prof or a new guy in the industry, and you have never worked in an industry here before. So how does somebody give you feedback on your job? Generally what I have found is like you have to, like if you're abroad, then it's a bit convoluted. Like people are extremely polite, so maybe even if you're not doing the correct thing, they won't point it out directly. They'll point it out in a very polite way, but we are not used to that. Like we are more used to the direct communication. So that's one thing that I personally found that's a big difference. So yeah, that's for the style of communication. So these are all like points explaining that is it better to settle abroad or India as a prof. So that's what I'm getting at. So, but then again, like I said, since I left India, there have been a lot of changes. I can't say that all the changes have been improvements, but then whatever I'm saying now is probably more true 4 years back than it's true exactly right now. As for a personal experience, like all of my master's close friends and NITK who pursued their PhDs that I know of, everybody pursued it from the US, and they are not going to like planning to come back to India anytime soon. So this whole like last few slides were subjective, but I just wanted to share my experience uh, with you and then leave it up to you to decide. So that's pretty much it. I'm open for questions now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, sir. That was a really informative session. So we have kind of like 10 questions from the audience. They've sent it through WhatsApp as well as in YouTube comments. I'll just start
Yeah.
with a very basic one, and it is like the questions from every single NITK Tech research students. So they're
Okay.
just confused whether to go for a job from NITK or a PhD. In the sense, like, let me just elaborate this thing. Uh, Jobs in NITK are like extremely lucrative, and they also have this attractive PhD position where their heart says that they want a doctor in front of their name, but still they're just confused between money and doctor. So what will you do here? What should they do?
Uh, so I think the first thing that I would probably do if I was in that situation is talk to somebody in the company, like somebody you can confide in. So somebody, maybe your senior, maybe your relative, maybe your friend's friend. So know that, okay, so the first question you ask yourself is, do I really want research? Like what level of research do I want? What type of job do I want? And reach out to the person. Uh, then if you decide that okay, this is good enough for me, I don't think there is any reason to just go for PhD for having that like the PhD in front of your name. So in that case, you there's no questions asked, just go ahead with the company. uh, and then maybe talk to somebody who is doing a PhD or who has graduated from a PhD at a particular department in anywhere in the world, not necessarily like US and Canada. And if you think your uh, what the person is saying is sort of like clicking with you, then go with that. But I understand that it may not be so easy because you might not know people in these both positions. But I think from my perspective, like going for PhD just because I want a PhD or that like I need a like a doctorate in front of my name, that can backfire. And I mean, I've seen people, because there are pitfalls that people get into in PhD. Like I've seen people falling out with their guides. They have had to change the supervisor like 2 years into the PhD program, and that makes the PhD longer. So the basic idea is these risks are there. So if you're getting into PhD, better be sure that you really want that. If you have a doubt, don't go for PhD.
Yeah, got it, sir. And the next question that is here is, does institute ranking or tag matter while applying for PhD? So,
Great question. So depends on, I think it varies from university to university. Like for UAlberta, I've seen mostly the people that are from India are mostly from the, be it interns or be it the students who got into the masters or PhD. So mostly are from the older IITs, and for NITs it's mostly Trichy, Surathkal, and not, I haven't really seen that many from Warangal. So it's mostly Trichy and Surathkal. Uh, so yeah, but then I have seen somebody from lower ranked NITs also, if you're just going with ranking. But I think uh, what matters most, especially if it's a research intensive university, they would probably look at your research fit. That's the first thing that they look at, whether what you are interested in is matching with their research agenda. The second is they'll see how good you are at it. So the institute ranking would come into play, but I think it would definitely not be the top criteria. It would definitely come in like three, I would say, and the top two would be something else. The top one or two should be the research fit and how good you are as the CU for the fit.
yes, thank you, sir. And the next question, uh, like, are PhD students allowed to do part-time jobs during PhD? I think this is outside the TA and RA duty that we
Yes,
usually do.
it depends on country to country, but at least in Canada, as far as I know, like the study permit that you get, it lets you do 20 hours of job. So 40 hours per week would be full time, 20 hours would be part time. So you are allowed to do that, but there are some conditions attached with it. I think, yes. So during the fall and the winter term, you can do the part time jobs. And there are also some restriction on whether you can do it inside the campus and outside. To be honest, I don't exactly remember. But yeah, you can.
Okay, sir. So the next question. Um, so do we need any kind of proof of fund while coming for PhD? Because for masters, institutes usually ask these things, but do we have to do the same for PhD? Because we are being paid at the same time.
Yeah.
Why do we have to do it?
Yeah, so this is mostly for the immigration, like when you apply for the study permit or the student visa. They do ask for some proof of funds, but I mean, it was a long time back, but if I remember correctly, I think the institute sends you that letter of funding that says that you are guaranteed this much amount of funding like per year. So that should suffice as your proof of funds. And I mean, if you have some more money in some bank account, just show that. But I think that usually is enough. Like if you have a funded admit, because the funding they always make it sure that it covers the living and tuition costs.
Oh, so got it. So next question. It is kind of silly, but yeah, this is from me. What kind of travel fundings do we get? Like attend multiple conferences, right? So if we are going to
Yeah.
Spain or Switzerland, will
Mhm.
institute sponsor it?
Yes, they do. At least that was my experience. There would be some cap on it. I mean, you can't go in business class and then ask them for the money. That doesn't happen. But yeah, for like reasonable costs, I think you don't have to pay anything. I even came to India. So in 2018, there was this conference that was okay. I should qualify this. So there are some restrictions as to what standard of conferences that you can attend, but given that that is met and those conditions are met, but then if your supervisor is letting you go to that conference, you would be pretty sure that like those conditions are being met. So as long as they are met, I think you don't have to pay anything.
Okay, so that's nice to know. So I'm just preparing my travel plan now. Okay. So the next question. This is about spring or fall admission. So I'll just elaborate this question. A little bit more context would be nice. So in India, we usually have this normal admission session that happens during July, and we also have the winter admission session that happens during December. And what happens is that in December, the number of seats would be very less. So is that the same in US and Canada? Or?
Same, exactly the same.
Okay. Okay.
Don't bank on winter admissions. I mean, just try
Okay.
for fall.
Got it. And so, what is your opinion on cross major PhDs? and interdisciplinary PhDs. For example, there's this PhD course. I mean, something that I want to do is called whole brain emulation, where scientists are like trying to imitate a human brain or a biological brain inside a computer. But it is a combination of subjects, right? It is
Computer
interdisciplinary.
science.
So
Precisely.
how does it work? How does the selection process work? Because my research papers are going to be pure computer science or computer vision. So how will it help me get a PhD in that field?
I mean, this is actually a very good question, but unfortunately, I don't know. Uh, I might try to get some answers, but I don't really know that many people that have done that. But definitely in UFA, there are programs that like combine multiple departments. But yeah, to be honest, I think they should look at your like overall, at least if it like involves ABC areas and you have some experience in A. The ideal candidate would be somebody who has experience in all of them, but that's hard to find. So given that you're still in the running, like you're still in the consideration towards, I mean, in front of the admission committee. So as long as you have a demonstrated experience in at least one of those areas, that should be good. But then again, like I really don't know that much.
Okay, sir, got it. So, and this is the final question. How much of a role does research internships and summer schools play while applying for PhD? And in case if internships play a role, summer schools are different. We can apply for it, and there's no other way. But for internships, how should we approach professors? Because they're in a different country. Will we get the opportunity, and will there be funding for the internship? So, can you please like elaborate on it?
Varies. Yeah, sorry. So I think it varies from country to country, but some countries, like for Canada, I know there is already a very like established framework. Like I said, it's called MyTax. So they have these different programs where people from certain countries they who are doing like their undergrad. It's mainly for undergrads actually. That's one thing that I don't like. It should be there for the masters as well, but most of their programs are for the undergrads. But they let you come to a Canadian university and they match you up with the professor. Uh, so as long as your interest matches with the professor and the professor likes your profile, it's everything is paid, like including the airfare from India to Canada. So in that case, there is like a framework that's already established. So you work within that framework. You upload your CV and whatnot like to some place, and there's a matching that happens. The framework for that is already there. Uh, Other than that, I think I know somebody who applied to different universities in Canada and didn't go through that framework. The thing what he told me, and again this was like 4 or 5 years back, he just send out as many applications as possible. Of course, send it out to places that you see a fit with what you're doing and what they are doing. But it's just about like emailing individual professors if there is no such framework already existing.
Okay, so got it. So just one more question. It just came up now. How long does it usually take to get the student visa? And like because we'll be applying for PhD, they'll give us a joining date. So
Yeah.
how much time will it take? And is it difficult to get one
Not
in a
really,
short time?
because I know for the US, even for the consulates in Canada, like for the US consulates in Canada, if you see the expected time for getting the visa interviews, you would always see that they differentiate between student visas, work visas, and visitor visas. So for the visitors visas, the time is the longest, of course, because of the pandemic. Like there's been a big backlog. But for student visas, you would see it's like 50 days, 40 days, 30 days, something like that, no matter which consulate you look at. It's the case in Canada. I'm pretty sure it's the same for India as well. So they always prioritize the student visas. For Canada, I don't really know, but back when I was applying, the whole process was online. There was no interview involved. I just had to go to a hospital to get some medical tests done, and the entire thing took like 1 month, not more than that.
Okay, so thank you. So that's about it. So we don't have any more questions. And thanks a lot for sparing us the time. And
Yeah, yeah, no problem. It was an honor. Yeah.
yeah. And also special thanks to IEEE and ITK, the BTech students, Viren Verma, Karthik Rao, and Vineet. You guys have helped me a lot while arranging this seminar. So thanks a lot. And I think it's time to end the broadcast.